The courtroom doors swung open just as the insurance lawyer stood to speak. "Your Honor," he began, "the insured, Olivia Hayes, tragically died during the boating accident 8 months ago." My husband, Richard, lowered his head and pretended to wipe away tears. His parents sat behind him, dressed in black, looking every bit like a grieving family. Then every head in the courtroom turned toward the entrance. I stepped inside wearing a simple blue dress. The silence was so complete that even the air seemed to stop moving. Richard looked up, saw me standing there, and the color drained from his face. The man who had collected $2 million because I was supposedly dead suddenly looked like he had seen a ghost. The truth was much darker than that. 8 months earlier, Richard had surprised me with a weekend trip to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. Just us, he smiled. No phones. No work. No distractions. It sounded perfect. We rented a small boat on a quiet mountain lake just before sunset. Halfway across the water, Richard suddenly stopped the engine. "Come here," he said. "I have something to show you." The moment I stepped closer, he shoved me with both hands. I hit the freezing water so hard I couldn't breathe. When I surfaced, the boat was already speeding away. Richard never looked back. I screamed until my voice disappeared into the empty mountains. The current pulled me farther from shore as darkness covered the lake. I knew I wouldn't survive another hour in the freezing water. Then, through the fog, I saw a small fishing boat. An elderly couple named Samuel and Grace heard my cries and pulled me aboard. By the time we reached land, I was unconscious from hypothermia. I spent nearly 3 weeks recovering in a remote mountain clinic. Because my identification had disappeared in the lake, the local authorities initially listed me as an unidentified accident victim. During those weeks, Richard reported me missing. Then, when divers failed to find my body, he convinced everyone that I had drowned. I wanted to call home immediately after I recovered. But before I did, the clinic director handed me a newspaper. Across the front page was Richard's smiling photograph beneath the headline. "Grieving husband receives $2 million insurance settlement." My hands started shaking. He hadn't searched for me. He hadn't hoped I was alive. He had collected my life insurance before anyone could question what had happened. That was the moment I realized returning home without evidence would only make me his next victim. Instead of contacting Richard, I contacted Detective Laura Bennett, a fraud investigator with the state police. She listened without interrupting as I described everything that had happened on the lake. Rather than revealing I was alive, she asked me to remain hidden while investigators quietly reopened the case. Over the next several months they uncovered disturbing evidence. Richard had secretly increased my life insurance coverage just 6 weeks before our anniversary trip. Internet searches from his laptop included phrases like, "body never found insurance payout," "missing spouse legal declaration," and "how long before presumed dead." Even worse, security footage showed him meeting privately with a woman named Vanessa only hours after collecting the insurance check. She wasn't just a friend. She had been his girlfriend for nearly 2 years. Investigators also discovered that Richard had purchased heavy marine chains, waterproof rope, and extra boat fuel the week before our trip. Although he later claimed they were for fishing equipment, receipts and witness statements told a different story. Everything pointed toward careful planning. Detective Bennett finally looked at me and said, "We have enough to charge him. But if you truly want the jury to understand what he did, there's one more step." I already knew what she meant. The insurance company filed a civil lawsuit against Richard after evidence of fraud began surfacing. The hearing was scheduled for a Monday morning. Richard confidently walked into court believing he would simply answer financial questions before returning home with the money. His attorney assured him there was nothing to worry about. Neither of them knew I was sitting quietly in a witness room down the hall. When the judge called the case, Richard repeated his carefully rehearsed story. He described the accident, his endless search for me, and the unbearable pain of losing the love of his life. Several jurors nodded sympathetically. Then Detective Bennett stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "the state requests permission to introduce new evidence." The judge agreed. She walked toward the courtroom doors and nodded once. I stepped inside. Richard's mouth fell open. Vanessa gasped so loudly the entire courtroom heard her. The insurance attorney slowly removed his glasses, unable to believe what he was seeing. Richard whispered only one word. "Olivia." I looked directly into his eyes. "You forgot one thing," I said quietly. "You should have made sure I was actually dead." The courtroom exploded with whispers. Richard's attorney immediately requested a recess, but the judge denied it. Detective Bennett presented photographs, financial records, GPS data from the boat, insurance documents, internet searches, and witness testimony from Samuel and Grace, the couple who had rescued me. Every piece fit together like a puzzle Richard had never expected anyone to solve. Then came the final evidence. A recording from the marina captured Richard making a phone call less than 10 minutes after pushing me into the lake. He laughed and said, "It's done. By next month we'll be rich." The voice on the other end belonged to Vanessa. Neither of them had known the marina automatically recorded every outgoing call placed through its emergency office telephone. Richard buried his face in his hands. Vanessa quietly left the courtroom in tears before the verdict was even announced. The jury found Richard liable for insurance fraud, attempted murder, conspiracy, and multiple financial crimes. The insurance company recovered every dollar of the fraudulent payout. Criminal sentencing followed several months later, ensuring he would spend decades behind bars. Vanessa accepted a plea agreement after admitting she had known about the insurance scheme from the beginning. A year later, I returned to the same lake where my life had almost ended. Samuel and Grace joined me as we watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. People often ask whether I hate Richard for what he tried to do. I tell them hatred would only let him steal more of my life. Instead, I chose something far more powerful. I survived. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with anger or revenge. Sometimes it simply walks through a courtroom door while the person who buried the truth watches their entire world collapse in complete silence.